HR has received the petition. This is your sixth late arrival this month, Emily. The voice of head nurse Ramos cut through the room like a cold scalpel. Every eye in the emergency break room turned toward Emily Tran, the young Vietnamese-American nurse with her dark hair tied into a messy bun, uniform wrinkled, and deep shadows beneath her eyes. Emily's fists clenched on her lap. She said nothing. No defense. No excuses. Another nurse whispered just loud enough for the whole table to hear. She's always late because she's lazy or out partying. We don't need someone like that in ICU. Ramos's face was stone. One more late shift, Emily, and you're suspended. Emily's lips parted as if to speak, but the sharp buzz of a phone interrupted. The head of security's voice came through. The elevator camera from basement level 1 recorded something unusual this morning. The director wants you all to see this. It was 6:47 a.m., and the ICU break room at Gracewood Memorial Hospital buzzed with the low hum of vending machines, coffee brewing, and tired footsteps. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as the nurses filtered in one by one, hair pulled tight, sneakers squeaking on the linoleum, clipboards in hand. Everyone, that is, except Emily Tran. Again. Nurse Jordan scrolled through his phone, glanced at the time, and scoffed. Guess who's late again? Head nurse Ramos didn't bother responding. Her eyes were already narrowed at the door, her arms folded across her chest with military precision. Ramos wasn't one for gossip. She preferred facts and consequences. But Emily's repeated tardiness had become a pattern she couldn't ignore. She glanced at the clock. 6:49. Unacceptable, she muttered. Nurse Linda, who had been with Gracewood since the early 2000s, leaned toward Jordan. What do you think it is? Another party girl who couldn't wake up on time? She doesn't look like a party girl, Jordan replied. But maybe she's hiding it better than we think. Nurses chuckled under their breath as they sipped from travel mugs and passed around laminated patient reports. But the laughter faded quickly when the door finally creaked open. Emily stepped in, her chest rising and falling as if she'd just sprinted across the parking lot. Her black hair was tied back hastily, and her scrubs were rumpled in a way that suggested they hadn't seen an iron in days. A faint smear of something red marked the hem of her sleeve. Unnoticed or ignored. Sorry I'm late, she said, voice soft, barely audible. She didn't meet anyone's eyes as she slid into the empty chair in the back of the room. Her fingers clutched a pen, ready to write, but her hands trembled faintly. Ramos didn't miss a beat. You're 7 minutes late. I know. This is the third week in a row you've been late to Monday briefings, Ramos interrupted. This isn't optional, Nurse Tran. We don't make exceptions for anyone. Emily didn't respond. Her jaw clenched, but she nodded and kept her gaze fixed on the patient sheets in front of her. The meeting moved on, but whispers buzzed around her like static. Words like irresponsible, unreliable, and selfish hovered in the air. In a department like ICU, where seconds meant life or death, being late wasn't just a bad habit, it was seen as disrespect. But Emily took it all in silence. She always did. After the meeting, Ramos pulled Emily aside. You're a good nurse, she began, closing the door behind them in the staff hallway. You're smart, you're fast, and you've got great instincts. But none of that means anything if your colleagues can't count on you to show up on time. Emily looked up briefly. Her eyes were bloodshot, and dark circles shadowed her face. I understand, she said softly. Ramos studied her. There was something in Emily's expression. Exhaustion, yes, but something more. A weight she carried that had nothing to do with morning meetings or patient charts. But Ramos shook the thought away. Everyone had personal issues. That didn't excuse lateness. You're on notice, Ramos said. Next late arrival, and I'll have to send it up to HR. No exceptions. Emily gave a tight nod. Yes, ma'am. Ramos watched her disappear into the corridor. Something about the way she walked, shoulders slightly hunched, head down, left a strange knot in her chest. But she said nothing. Back in the break room, Jordan tossed an empty coffee cup into the bin. Wonder what her excuse is this time. She doesn't give excuses, Linda replied. That's the weird part. Doesn't even try to defend herself. You think she's got something to hide? Linda shrugged. Maybe, or maybe she just doesn't want us to know. Emily, meanwhile, had already slipped into room 312 to check on Mr. Halverson, a post-op cardiac patient with a fragile rhythm. She worked with quiet precision, adjusting his IV, checking his vitals, recording notes in the system. Her hands were steady now, and her face calm. No one would have guessed she'd been breathless just 10 minutes ago. She moved from room to room like a ghost, invisible, unnoticed, yet indispensable. Even those who judged her couldn't deny she was good at what she did. Maybe too good. But as Emily exited room 318 and made her way to the nurse station, she caught a reflection of herself in the glass. Her own eyes startled her, not because of their redness or the bags beneath them, but because she couldn't remember the last time she'd really looked. Not at the reflection, not at herself. That night, as the staff clocked out and joked about happy hour plans or the latest hospital drama, Emily packed her bag and headed out alone. She didn't join them. She never did. Outside, the wind bit at her skin. Streetlights flickered on as dusk swallowed the sky. She didn't call a ride or wave down a bus. Instead, she walked, past the hospital, past the familiar turns. Her real shift, the one no one saw, was just beginning. At 4:15 a.m., the city was still half asleep. Most windows were dark, save for a few flickers of TV light in the apartments of night shift workers or insomniacs. The wind scraped along the streets of South Charlotte, catching stray newspapers and rattling loose trash bins. Emily's breath fogged the air as she reached the Camden Pines complex, a squat, red brick building with more rust than paint. Its name once gleamed on a metal sign out front, but now the letters were faded and pockmarked with dents. She didn't enter through the main lobby. Instead, she walked around to the rear alley, where a steel maintenance door sat hidden behind two overflowing dumpsters. Her steps were deliberate, practiced. This wasn't a detour. This was her ritual. From her canvas shoulder bag, she pulled out a set of keys attached to a lanyard that had seen better days. One of the keys, old and unmarked, slipped into the lock. With a soft click, the door opened, revealing a narrow staircase bathed in flickering fluorescent light. The smell hit her instantly, metal, mold, and antiseptic, a combination she knew all too well. Emily moved quickly, descending 2 flights to basement unit C, a room not listed on any tenant register. The walls here were exposed concrete, cracked and sweating moisture. Pipes ran across the ceiling like skeletal veins. She tapped lightly before entering, though she knew no one would respond. Inside, her father lay on a hospital cot, bundled in faded flannel blankets. His skin was pale, sunken, almost waxy in the dim glow of the single desk lamp. A portable oxygen machine hummed steadily beside him, tubes looping over his ears and into his nose. Several pill bottles, some labeled, some not, sat in organized rows on a folding table. A blood pressure cuff dangled from the edge. A plastic container of Ensure was tucked next to an empty syringe. Emily set her bag down gently and knelt beside him. "Hi, Dad," she whispered, brushing his thin gray hair from his forehead. "It's me." His eyelids fluttered, but he didn't wake. He rarely did anymore during these early hours. She got to work. For the next 40 minutes, Emily became a nurse no one at Gracewood Memorial ever saw. She took his vitals: temperature, pulse, blood pressure, O2 saturation. She adjusted the flow of the oxygen tank and swapped out the filter. Then she cleaned his feeding port, changed the catheter bag, and carefully administered his morning medication. A cocktail of muscle relaxants, steroids, and pain relief that kept his condition stable. When the syringe stuck, she didn't flinch. When the tubing tangled, she untwisted it calmly. She'd done this hundreds of times. There were no machines to beep warnings, no backup nurse to catch a mistake. It was all her. After finishing the physical care, she opened a small composition notebook and scribbled notes in shorthand. 3:45 a.m., shallow breathing, moderate cough, increased mucus production, BP steady, no fever, chest compression in lower left remains. Will monitor. Then she sat beside him for just 1 minute. Let herself breathe. Her father's name was Din Tron, once a factory technician at a metalworks plant in Gastonia. He had worked 6 days a week for over 25 years, never late, never out sick. Until one morning, his lungs simply stopped cooperating. The diagnosis came swiftly: progressive pulmonary fibrosis, compounded by years of inhaling industrial dust and chemical vapors. When the plant shut down, his health insurance vanished. Medicaid denied his application 3 times. The hospital had stabilized him, but long-term care? That was on her. Emily had tried. She took on double shifts, sold her car, moved into a shared rental. Then finally, when rent got too high, she accepted the offer of a maintenance worker who let her borrow the old supply room in Camden Pines. No one else wanted it. It was barely livable, but it was something. And every morning, she arrived before the world stirred, before her own job as a nurse began, to keep her father alive. By 5 a.m., she had washed her face in a plastic bowl, tied her hair back again, and changed into a clean scrub top. She stood by the cot one last time and looked down at him. He was still asleep, shallow breaths moving his chest in rhythm with the hiss of the oxygen. "I'll be back tonight," she whispered. "Be strong." She kissed his forehead, turned off the lamp, and slipped back into the corridor, locking the door behind her. The walk to the hospital was brisk and quiet. Her mind wandered, like it always did during that 30-minute stretch. Part guilt, part adrenaline, part fear. What if she forgot a medication? What if the oxygen failed while she was gone? What if today was the day he didn't wake? But she pushed it all down, like she always did, like she had to. At 5:52 a.m., she reached the back entrance of Gracewood, where the staff loading dock met the B1 elevator. She didn't have time to go through the main lobby. She pressed the button with trembling fingers, her reflection staring back at her in the stainless steel doors. When they opened, she stepped inside. Alone, the same camera above the ceiling that no one ever checked flickered on. She slumped briefly against the elevator wall, letting the exhaustion crawl up her spine. Then she slapped her cheek, just once, and straightened up. Badge clipped, hair neat, face composed. 6 a.m. sharp, the elevator doors opened on the ICU floor, and Emily walked out like nothing had happened. The ICU break room at Gracewood Memorial was a strange place. Equal parts battlefield, hack therapy circle, and gossip corner. It was where caffeine fueled decisions that saved lives and where sideways glances could cut deeper than a scalpel. By midweek, Emily's lateness had become a constant conversation thread among the staff. "You'd think someone in ICU would care more about being on time," muttered Nurse Jordan, stirring powdered creamer into his coffee as if it had personally offended him. Linda, sitting at the table organizing medication sheets, didn't respond immediately. "She's good with the patients," she said finally without looking up. Jordan scoffed. "Yeah, and Houdini was good at disappearing too. Doesn't mean I'd trust him with a defibrillator." A few others chuckled, and the remark floated through the room, latching onto the mood like lint. Emily entered just as the laughter tapered off. She didn't ask what the joke was. She never did. Her eyes flicked toward them for a second, then dropped to the chart in her hand. "Morning," she said quietly. "Late again," Ramos noted from the far end of the room. She wasn't being cruel, not in her mind, just precise. "By 4 minutes," Emily replied, voice measured, eyes fixed on her notes. "In ICU, 4 minutes can mean a stopped heart." Emily bit the inside of her cheek. She knew Ramos didn't mean it personally, but still, the words landed like a slap. She wanted to explain, to tell them everything. But how could she begin with? "I change my father's oxygen tank at 4:30 every morning, and if I mess up, he could die before I get home from work." So instead, she swallowed her voice and nodded. "Understood." Later that afternoon, the tension reached its breaking point. Room 327. A code blue call went out for a 71-year-old man with renal failure and arrhythmia. Emily was closest. She rushed in with Nurse Darrell just behind her. The man was crashing fast, heart rate erratic, breathing shallow. His skin had turned the sickly gray that signaled time was short. Emily reached for the syringe tray. Darrell shouted the dosage, 5 milligrams of metoprolol IV push, and Emily's fingers hesitated for just a second. Her eyes scanned the labels too quickly, still wired from lack of sleep. She caught herself, thank God, before administering the wrong medication. But the moment of delay didn't go unnoticed. Darrell grabbed the correct vial and continued the procedure with steady hands. The patient stabilized, but the look he gave her afterward said everything. "You almost made a fatal error." Afterward, Darrell cornered her in the medication room. "What happened in there?" he demanded. "I corrected it," she replied flatly. "But you froze." "That could have killed him, Emily. You don't get to correct that kind of mistake." "I'm fine," she said, sharper this time. "No, you're not," he shot back. "You've been off for weeks. You're late every day. You look like you haven't slept in a month. If you need help." "I don't," she snapped, voice rising for the first time. A beat of silence. Darrell stepped back. "Then you better figure it out, fast, or someone else is going to file a report." And someone did. That evening, while Emily scrubbed her hands raw at the sink in the staff room, a formal complaint landed on Ramos's desk. Repeated tardiness and unfit behavior under pressure. Nurse Emily Tran. It wasn't personal, just protocol, but Ramos sighed heavily when she saw it. Her gut told her something wasn't right, not just with the complaint, but with Emily herself. There was a sadness in her lately. Not the usual burnout, but a bone-deep weariness, the kind that lived behind the eyes and hollowed out your bones. Still, rules were rules. The next morning, Emily was summoned to the supervisory review meeting, the one she would enter in Chapter 1, with all the quiet humiliation of someone accused and cornered. The moment when the elevator footage, still unrevealed, hovered like a storm just over the horizon. But in the final hours before that meeting, something else happened. Nurse Linda lingered behind after her shift and decided to follow a hunch. She remembered Emily's bloodshot eyes, the tremble in her hands, and, most curiously, the faint scent of antiseptic on her uniform before she even entered the hospital some mornings. Most nurses didn't carry that smell in from outside. It clung to you after the workday, not before. So Linda walked down to the security office near the basement supply elevators. She'd heard about the recent string of inventory thefts and the increased review of camera footage. "Hey, Carl," she said to the security guard behind the desk. "You ever seen Emily Tran on those tapes? She always uses the B1 elevator. Something feels off." Carl raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Let me check the timestamps." And that's when he saw it. 4:55 a.m. Emily, alone in the elevator, breathing heavy, clothes rumpled, hands shaking. She leaned against the wall, closed her eyes, then slapped her cheek softly, pulled herself upright, clipped her ID badge to her scrub top, and stepped out. Not late, early, far too early for any shift. Carl played it again, slower. Linda stared at the screen. She didn't speak, but for the first time, someone did more than whisper about Emily Tran. The HR meeting room on the second floor of Gracewood Memorial had never felt so quiet. Head nurse Ramos stood near the projector screen, arms crossed tighter than usual. Behind her, Emily sat alone, small in a room that suddenly felt like a courtroom. The faint hum of the ceiling vent was the only sound. The others hadn't arrived yet. On the desk in front of Ramos was a slim USB drive. She hadn't told Emily about the footage yet. Not until the others could see it with their own eyes. At 6:55 a.m., the door opened, and two supervisors from administration entered, followed by Carl from security, who carried a laptop and a blank expression. Last to arrive was Linda, who offered Emily a small nod of encouragement. Emily didn't notice. Ramos cleared her throat. "Before we discuss disciplinary measures," she said, addressing the room, "I'd like to show you something. Security has reviewed footage from the basement-level elevator. Nurse Tran was captured on camera this morning, and several other mornings before today." She glanced at Emily, who blinked but said nothing. Carl connected the laptop, clicked a few files, and cast the video onto the wall-mounted screen. What played was short, just under a minute, but it changed everything. The footage showed the timestamp, 4:55 a.m. Emily entered the B1 elevator, alone. No sound, only visuals. She looked exhausted, her scrub top slightly wrinkled, her face pale, her breath unsteady. Her hands trembled as she leaned against the metal wall, closing her eyes for just a moment. Then came the part that made everyone freeze. She slapped her own cheek. Not hard, but enough to snap herself into alertness. Then she stood straight, pulled out her hospital badge, clipped it on, and took one long breath. The elevator opened. She stepped out. End of clip. No one said a word at first. The projection screen glowed blankly in the silence. Then Linda spoke. That was taken an hour before her shift. Ramos nodded slowly. Carl added, "We've got similar footage from 3 other mornings. Different days. Same time. Same elevator." One of the admin supervisors looked over at Emily, eyebrows furrowed. "Where were you coming from?" Emily didn't answer right away. She seemed frozen in her seat, not from guilt, but from the quiet heartbreak of being seen too late. I take care of my father," she said finally, voice so quiet it felt like it might collapse. Ramos stepped forward. "We didn't know, Emily." "No one asked," she replied. For a few seconds, all Emily could hear was the sound of her own breathing. Then came the questions. "Is he sick? How long have you been doing this? Why didn't you request accommodations? I didn't want to burden anyone," she said. "I didn't want people to think I couldn't do my job." Ramos sat down across from her. Emily, we thought you didn't care. I care too much, Emily said. Her eyes finally met Ramos's. That's the problem. There it was. Not just fatigue in her gaze, but years of it. Worry layered under responsibility, under pride, under fear of being dismissed for the very thing that made her strong. One of the supervisors leaned forward. What exactly do you do every morning? Emily's hands fidgeted with the hem of her scrub top. She inhaled. I wake up at 3:30 a.m. I walk 40 minutes to an old apartment where my father lives in a converted storage room. He has late-stage pulmonary fibrosis. He needs oxygen, meds, a feeding tube. I handle all of that before I come in. There's no one else. It's just me. No dramatics, no tears, just the truth. And it hit harder than any excuse ever could. Ramos cleared her throat again, not to speak but to hide the sudden shake in her voice. She stared at the desk. We made assumptions, she said quietly, and we owe you an apology. The administrators exchanged glances. One of them, a younger man in a pressed gray suit, leaned back and sighed. I think we can agree that this meeting is not going to end in a suspension, he said. Quite the opposite. Emily blinked. What does that mean? It means, Ramos said, looking back at her, we're going to help. By noon that day, word had begun to spread throughout the ICU. The whispers had changed. Now they weren't mocking. They were quiet, respectful, curious, and in many cases, regretful. Linda returned to the nurse's station after lunch to find a sticky note on her clipboard. You were right. I feel like crap, Jay. Daryl, the nurse who had once accused Emily of hesitation, looked up from his shift log and said nothing, just nodded solemnly as she passed by. And Ramos? She stayed behind after her shift ended. She rewatched the video, twice. Then she drafted an internal memo with a bolded subject line, before you judge, ask. It was 7:19 p.m. when Emily turned the key into the rusted basement lock at Camden Pines. Her shift had ended 2 hours earlier, but she'd stayed behind to help a new nurse with a critical patient transfer. No one forced her to. It was just who she was. The hallway smelled worse than usual tonight, damp drywall and something faintly sour. The fluorescent light above Unit C flickered intermittently as she approached, painting the corridor in pulses of gray and shadow. When she opened the door, a wave of sterile cold air and machine hum greeted her. Familiar, almost comforting in its constancy. But something wasn't right. Her father wasn't breathing normally. She dropped her bag and rushed to his side. His face was ashen, mouth slightly open, eyes barely responsive. The rise and fall of his chest was uneven, and the hiss of the oxygen machine stuttered between gasps. Dad? She whispered, already checking his pulse, grabbing the pulse oximeter from the folding table. The screen blinked to life. O2 saturation, 83%. Way too low. She adjusted the nasal cannula, checked for kinks in the tubing, then examined the machine. Her heart sank. The oxygen concentrator was struggling, its filters whirring loudly. A red indicator light blinked. Maintenance required. No, 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 she muttered, opening the side panel. The interior was coated in a thin layer of dust. She'd cleaned it regularly, as best she could, but this unit was almost 10 years old. It was never meant to run 24 hours a day, especially in conditions like these. She turned back to her father, gently lifting his head and adjusting the pillow. It's okay, Dad. Just hold on. I've got you. He didn't speak, hadn't in weeks, but his eyes fluttered, just enough for her to know he was still with her. She sat down on the stool beside the cot and pressed her forehead against his frail hand. What if I hadn't made it in time? What if it fails while I'm at work tomorrow? What if this is the night I lose him? It wasn't the first time those thoughts had visited her, but tonight they settled deeper than usual, like roots breaking through concrete. She stood and moved toward the plastic tub where she stored backup supplies. Filters, tubing, bandages. It was nearly empty. Her hand trembled as she opened her father's medication organizer. 3 pills left in one section, 2 in another. She pulled her phone from her pocket and opened her note app, her makeshift inventory log. Everything was running out. Everything. She sat back down and stared at the wall. Gracewood Memorial had promised support. They'd offered her a meeting with social services, a few names of elder care agencies, even a part-time visiting nurse. But none of it had materialized yet. The system moved slowly. Paperwork, reviews, approvals, weeks, maybe months. Her father didn't have months. Emily pulled the folded hospital memo from her pocket. the one Ramos had distributed earlier that day. Before you judge, ask. She traced the words with her fingertip, as if hoping they might provide a solution. She had done everything right. She'd sacrificed sleep, comfort, and her own future to keep him alive. But now, the reality of her limits pressed in like a rising tide. And for the first time in years, the thought crept in. What if I can't do this anymore? She was still sitting there an hour later when she heard the knock. It was faint, just 3 soft taps against the metal door. Emily froze. No one knew about this place. No one should be here. Cautiously, she stood, slid the bolt, and opened the door an inch. A woman stood in the hallway, dark coat, clipboard in hand, hospital ID badge visible on a lanyard. "Emily Tran?" she asked. Emily blinked. "Yes?" "I'm Claire Sanchez, social worker at Gracewood. I tried calling, but your number didn't go through. I was told I might find you here." Emily opened the door wider, wary but curious. Claire smiled gently. "I heard about your father. Head nurse Ramos flagged your case. I just wanted to see if we could start the process to get you 2 real support." Emily exhaled. The timing was too perfect, too fragile. She stepped aside and let Claire in. For the next half hour, Emily answered questions she'd never said out loud. When did the symptoms begin? How long had she been the sole caregiver? Did she have power of attorney? Any legal paperwork? What were her backup options in case of emergency? Emily answered everyone honestly, and as she did, something inside her began to crack. Not in despair, but in release. It was no longer just her burden to carry. Claire looked around the makeshift room, the aging equipment, the single plastic drawer of medications. "You've done everything you could," she said softly. Emily didn't realize her eyes were wet until the tears slid down her cheek. "I just didn't want him to feel forgotten," she whispered. "Not after everything he's done for me." Claire nodded. "He won't be. Not anymore." They arranged for an emergency oxygen unit upgrade, a temporary in-home nurse, and an expedited Medicaid appeal. Claire promised to be back the next day with paperwork and groceries from a relief fund. For the first time in months, Emily allowed herself to believe things might actually get better. She sat beside her father again, took his hand in hers, and closed her eyes. 2 days after Claire Sanchez's visit, Emily arrived at Gracewood Memorial to find something different. It wasn't the shift schedule or the patient assignments. Those were the same. It wasn't the coffee machine either, which still brewed that burnt-tasting sludge everyone pretended to like. No, it was the way people were looking at her. Not judging, not whispering behind their clipboards. They were watching her the way people stare at paintings in museums, a strange mixture of reverence and curiosity, as if they weren't quite sure if she was real. At first, Emily assumed she had something on her face. She even ducked into the restroom to check. Hair in place, scrubs clean, no stains. It wasn't until she stepped into the break room that she understood. A tablet sat on the table. The screen glowed with a paused news segment. The headline across the bottom read, "Local nurse's early morning ritual captured on camera, a story of quiet heroism." Emily's face stared back at her from the elevator footage, her hand mid-motion as she clipped on her ID badge, her eyes red, her posture defiant. She froze. "What is this?" she asked, her voice tight. Nurse Jordan looked up, startled. "Oh, you didn't see it yet?" Linda stood from the table, her face suddenly apologetic. "Emily, I was going to tell you. A friend of mine is a journalist. She saw the video. I didn't give her your name, I swear, but someone from admin must have leaked it after the meeting. She ran a piece on unsung healthcare workers, and..." She gestured toward the tablet. "Now it's everywhere." Emily blinked. "Everywhere?" Jordan nodded. "Local news. Some health blogs picked it up. There's a Reddit post with like 10,000 upvotes." She felt the blood drain from her face. "I didn't want this," she whispered. Linda stepped closer. "I know. But, Emily, it moved people. There's a GoFundMe someone started this morning. It already hit $5,000. People are asking how they can help." Over the next few hours, the reality of the situation unfolded like a tide that couldn't be stopped. Her inbox exploded with messages from reporters, nonprofit reps, even strangers, all praising her strength, her devotion. Her old high school counselor sent a long email about how proud she was. Someone from the mayor's office left a voicemail offering a community spotlight recognition. But with the attention came a new kind of discomfort. Some people now avoided eye contact with her completely, unsure how to talk to the woman from the video. Others tried too hard, showering her with compliments she didn't know how to receive. Even Ramos, who had been so composed during the disciplinary meetings, now regarded her with the quiet guilt of someone trying to make up for too much too late. "I didn't authorize any video release," she said that afternoon, handing Emily a printed apology statement from hospital legal. "I know," Emily replied, "but it's out there now." By the end of her shift, she felt more exhausted than usual, not physically, but emotionally. As she walked through the lobby, she noticed a mother in the waiting area nudging her son. "That's her," the woman whispered. The boy looked at Emily with wide eyes. "You're the elevator nurse." Emily gave him a small, tired smile and pushed through the doors. The night air hit her like a wall. She didn't go straight to Camden Pines. Instead, she walked the long way around the block, past the diner with the neon sign, past the laundromat where she used to fold scrubs late into the night, past the bookstore that still had her father's old how-to welding manual in the window. Everywhere she looked, the world seemed to know her now, but not as Emily Tran, daughter, nurse, fighter. No, they knew the version of her frozen in a camera frame. She arrived at the basement unit just after 8 p.m. Her father was awake, barely, his eyes tracing the ceiling with slow, dull movements. "You wouldn't believe the week I've had," she said gently, pulling off her coat. "Apparently, I'm a hero now. That's weird, right?" He didn't answer, but his fingers twitched, just a little, and she took that as acknowledgement. She sat beside him and began the evening routine: medication, feeding tube, vitals, all while the oxygen concentrator hummed with its new filters, courtesy of a donation from a local medical supplier who had seen the story. As she adjusted the tubing, her father's eyes found hers. Tears welled without warning. "I'm not strong, Dad," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I'm just trying." He blinked once, and for a moment it felt like he understood everything. After she finished the notes in her care log, Emily checked her phone. Another 17 new messages. 3 voicemails, 2 missed calls from out-of-state numbers. She silenced the notifications and stared at the ceiling. The world had opened a door. And now she had to choose: walk through it or shut it again. The next morning began not with the buzz of her alarm, but with the buzz of her phone. It vibrated across the nightstand like a trapped insect. 5:12 a.m., far earlier than most people would dare call. Emily blinked against the dark, reached blindly, and pulled it close. Unknown number. Voicemail pending. She let it ring out. Another followed, then another. She sat up, heart thudding. Something felt off. Her inbox showed 72 unread messages, 3 new voicemails, 10 social media mentions, her name tagged under headlines, comment threads, and unbelievably, a fan edit posted on TikTok with piano music layered over her elevator footage. She tossed the phone down with a sigh and pressed her palms to her face. Fame, if this could even be called that, was supposed to be a bright light. But all Emily could feel was how badly it burned. When she arrived at Gracewood's side entrance at 6:20 a.m., the first thing she noticed was the crowd. 3 news vans were parked outside the delivery dock. A reporter stood with a microphone pointed toward the building, her voice already amplified through a small boom mic. A young nurse captured in a now viral video caring for her father in secret while working full-time in the ICU. Emily froze. One of the camera operators spotted her. "There she is," he whispered. The reporter turned. "Miss Tran? Emily? Could we get a word? Just one quick question?" Emily slipped through the employee entrance, her badge barely registering before the door slammed shut behind her. She exhaled hard, heart racing. Inside, Linda waited at the nurse's station, a hot coffee in one hand and a look of sympathy on her face. "You okay?" she asked. Emily shook her head. "They're out there, with cameras." Linda nodded. "And they're not leaving." By midday, her photo was on the hospital homepage. The board of directors had approved a media statement calling her story a beacon of resilience and commitment in the face of systemic gaps. They praised her strength, thanked donors for their outpouring of support, and quietly set up a PR campaign around her image. A flyer was taped to the break room door. "Meet the heart of Gracewood, Emily Tran, RN." Community Spotlight. Tuesday at 3 p.m., all staff welcome. Emily stared at it in disbelief. "I never agreed to that," she said to Ramos. The head nurse looked uneasy. Administration sees this as an opportunity, a way to raise awareness. They want to show what nurses go through behind the scenes. Emily crossed her arms. I didn't do this for attention. I know, Ramos said gently. But now that people are watching, they won't stop just because you want them to. That afternoon, a patient in recovery requested to see her. Then another. Then a woman from the cafeteria left a thank you note on her locker. Someone from ICU left a granola bar and a sticky note that read, "You make us proud." It should have felt good, validating even. But all Emily felt was exposed. Every smile felt like a microscope. Every compliment, a spotlight. She had built a world of privacy to protect herself and her father. And now it was unraveling. At 8:17 p.m., exhausted and overstimulated, she returned to Camden Pines. The alley behind the building was darker than usual, the air thick with humidity. She turned the key into the back door, but something caught her eye before she could step through. A bright orange sticker plastered across the door. Warning of eviction, unauthorized use of facility. This basement unit is not zoned for residential occupation. Violation of Code 14.03. Residents must vacate within 72 hours. Camden Pines Management. Her breath caught. She tore the notice down and stormed inside. Her father was asleep, soft breathing, oxygen hissing quietly, unaware of the bombshell now ticking just outside the door. Emily crumpled the notice in her fist. Someone had reported her. She could guess who. The cameras, the news. Someone had recognized the space in the footage, looked up the property, tipped off management. The story that brought donations and support had also pulled back the curtain on the illegality of her survival plan. Her sanctuary was no longer safe. She sat down beside her father and placed her forehead on the edge of his bed. A slow tear slid down her cheek. I tried, Dad, she whispered. I tried so hard to keep you here, to keep it quiet, but they found us anyway. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she drafted a letter to the hospital board, begging for emergency housing aid. She called the one contact Claire Sanchez had given her for elder care assistance. She even considered calling the local news herself, turning the camera back on those threatening to evict a dying man from the only place keeping him alive. But by 3 a.m., with no answers and the silence pressing down like a stone, she stared at her father and whispered the question that had haunted her for weeks. What if I can't protect you anymore? Emily stood outside the hospital boardroom at 8:59 a.m., her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears. Behind the double doors, a panel of administrators, PR representatives, and medical directors waited to begin the community spotlight event planned in her honor. There would be a short speech, a framed certificate, maybe a photo with the hospital CEO. It was all supposed to celebrate her, but she wasn't here for applause. She was here to ask for help. The eviction notice sat folded in her coat pocket, worn at the edges from being clenched all night. She looked down the hallway and saw Claire Sanchez approaching, her pace brisk, face pinched with concern. You got my message? Emily asked. Claire nodded. I'm sorry. I didn't know they'd file an official code violation so quickly. Camden Pines has every legal right to remove you. And my father? Emily whispered. They'll dump him where? The street? Claire hesitated. We have emergency transitional facilities, but they're overcrowded, not suitable for his condition. Emily swallowed hard. She'd already guessed the answer, but hearing it aloud made it real. She reached into her coat and handed Claire the folded eviction notice. I want you to show this to them. All of them. Right now. Claire raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? No, Emily said honestly. But I don't have time to be sure. 10 minutes later, the boardroom lights dimmed for a slideshow. The first slide, a still image of Emily in the elevator. The second, headlines and social media quotes praising her as the beating heart of healthcare. The third, a banner mock-up for the hospital's website, reading, Emily Tran, RN, Grace Under Pressure. Applause echoed through the room. Then Claire stood. Before we continue, she said, Miss Tran has something important to share. Emily stepped forward. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. I'm honored by the support, she began, but I can't accept praise without asking for something more important. She pulled the eviction notice from her coat and laid it on the table in front of the hospital director. This is what I found taped to the door of my father's unit. Murmurs filled the room. Your father's what? Someone asked. Emily took a breath. I've been caring for my father in an unauthorized basement unit for over a year. The oxygen you saw in that video? It was hooked up in a storage room. There's no heating, no proper plumbing. I did it because I had no other choice. I did it because no one asked how I was managing. One of the PR staff frowned. Why didn't you bring this up earlier? Because I was afraid you'd see me as a liability instead of an asset, she said. And because I didn't want my father to be reduced to a policy problem. Silence. Uneasy, shifting silence. Emily's gaze swept the room. You want to use my face for your campaign? She asked. Then you need to see where that elevator ride started. Not the hospital, not ICU, but a locked basement with mold on the walls and an oxygen machine held together with tape. She paused. You can't applaud someone for surviving the system if you're not willing to change the system. No one applauded when she finished. No one moved. Claire stood again, breaking the tension. Miss Tran has agreed to let one representative accompany her this afternoon to view the facility firsthand. I suggest we take that opportunity to understand what our silence has cost her. The hospital director, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes, nodded. I'll go. That afternoon, Emily led the hospital director through the alley behind Camden Pines. Claire walked silently beside them. The director said nothing as they entered through the back, descended the crumbling stairwell, and entered the storage unit. The air was heavy with age and disinfectant. A single bulb flickered above the cot. The oxygen machine rattled faintly in the corner. Emily's father lay asleep, unaware of the eyes now taking in the entirety of his world. The director turned in a slow circle. She took in the cracked concrete walls, the makeshift med station, the file of handwritten notes. Finally, she turned to Emily. I've worked in this system for 38 years, she said, and I've never seen someone do more with less. Emily said nothing. She didn't trust her voice. The director continued, We'll begin emergency placement immediately. We have a foundation partnership that offers temporary hospice housing. It's not perfect, but it's safe, and warm, and legal. Emily's knees nearly gave out. Thank you, she whispered. By nightfall, plans were in motion. Paperwork was expedited. An ambulance was arranged for a quiet transfer the next day. A case manager was assigned to Emily's father full-time. The basement unit, the place that had been a prison and a sanctuary, would soon be empty. As Emily sat beside her father for what might be the last night in that room, she felt the strangest thing. Relief. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying the weight alone. The transfer took place just after dawn. Emily watched as two paramedics gently lifted her father onto a stretcher, his oxygen tank secured, his limbs wrapped in soft flannel blankets. The new hospice facility was only a few miles away, clean, staffed, and properly equipped. But as the ambulance doors closed, Emily felt like she was handing away a part of her soul. For months, every breath he took had been tied to her. Her hands, her schedule, her unspoken promise. Now that responsibility passed to someone else. She stood in the alley for a long time, the cold concrete underfoot, the empty basement room behind her. It was over. At least, that chapter was. Back at Gracewood, the atmosphere had shifted again. What had once been admiration had curdled into controversy. It started with a news headline 2 days earlier. Illegal nursing setup discovered beneath local apartment complex. Hero nurse or criminal caregiver? Then came the tweets. Some questioned her ethics. Some accused her of endangering her father. One viral post read, open quote, if a parent needs hospice care, that's what Medicare is for, not DIY oxygen tanks in a basement. This isn't noble, it's negligent. Close quote. Another comment hit harder. Open quote, Gracewood is rewarding someone who broke housing and healthcare codes, so if I steal medication for my grandma, I'm a hero now too? Close quote. The hospital's official Facebook page, once flooded with support, now featured divided comment threads, each more heated than the last. Words like reckless, illegal, unsafe, and irresponsible cropped up alongside older comments praising her. In just 1 week, Emily had gone from symbol of sacrifice to target of scrutiny. In the break room that morning, no one made eye contact. Even Linda seemed quieter than usual, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. They're calling a review, she finally said. Hospital compliance. Someone filed an anonymous complaint, probably from outside, but still. Emily didn't flinch. She'd expected this. Do they want to fire me? No one said that, but you'll need to meet with legal, HR too. Emily nodded, then took a slow sip from her paper cup. The coffee tasted like ash. Later that day, Ramos pulled her aside. I don't agree with how this is being handled, she said, closing the door behind them in the office. But I need you to know that this storm is going to get worse before it gets better. I'm not surprised, Emily said. Her voice was even, but there was an ache beneath it. They loved the story when it was simple, when it made them feel inspired. But now that it's complicated, they're scared of what it says about the system, Ramos finished. And it's easier to blame the person than to fix the problem. Emily looked up. Do you think I was wrong? Ramos didn't answer right away. She folded her arms, then leaned against the desk. I think you did what you had to do. And I think a lot of people can't handle how much that says about the gaps in what we call healthcare. That night, Claire Sanchez called with more news. I've spoken to the hospice facility. Your father's vitals have weakened. They're keeping him comfortable. But Emily closed her eyes. How long? They won't guess, but you should probably come soon. Emily arrived at the hospice unit just before 10 p.m. The room was clean and quiet, lit by a soft bedside lamp. Her father looked smaller now, somehow even more fragile outside the tight quarters of the basement. She sat beside him and took his hand. I'm sorry it wasn't perfect, she whispered. But I tried. I really did. His eyes flickered. Barely. But it was enough. She pressed her forehead to his hand and let the silence say the rest. When she returned home, the hospital review email was waiting in her inbox. Subject, Notice of Internal Inquiry, Nurse E. Tran. Dear Miss Tran, in response to concerns raised regarding your past caregiving practices, the compliance department has scheduled a formal meeting. She didn't read the rest. Instead, she opened a blank document. She began to write, what you didn't see in the elevator footage. You saw a tired nurse. You saw red eyes, shaky hands, and quiet resilience. But you didn't see the basement. You didn't see the unpaid bills. You didn't see me walking 40 minutes in the dark to keep my father alive because I had no other option. You didn't see the system fail us again and again, and how I stitched the pieces together with medical tape and prayers. And you didn't see me cry when the world applauded me and then turned away. She paused, then added one last line. If I broke the rules, it's because the rules broke people like us first. She didn't know if she'd publish it, but the words were there now, and they felt like armor. The room was colder than she expected. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting the conference table in a pale glow. A digital clock on the wall ticked past 9:02 a.m., but no one seemed eager to begin. Emily sat at the far end of the polished table, flanked by 2 HR representatives and a compliance officer. On the opposite end were 3 hospital board members, including the same director who had walked through the basement apartment with her just days ago. Claire Sanchez was seated beside her, quiet but steady, her presence a silent show of support. Emily had worn her cleanest navy scrubs, hair tied back neatly, no makeup. She didn't want to look polished. She wanted to look honest. The director cleared her throat. Nurse Tran, thank you for being here. As you know, this meeting was called in response to questions raised by outside parties concerning your former living and caregiving arrangements. While we acknowledge the extraordinary efforts you made, we are also obligated to review any potential violations of ethical or professional conduct. Emily nodded, but said nothing. The director continued. Before we proceed, you've requested to make a personal statement. You may do so now. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper, folded once, worn at the crease. Her fingers trembled only slightly as she unfolded it and began to read aloud. You saw me in an elevator. You saw fatigue in my eyes and strength in my silence. But you didn't see the hours before that moment. The basement room, the oxygen machine held together by tape, the hands that shook not from nerves but from cleaning my father's wounds in the dark. You saw a nurse showing up late. You didn't see the daughter who'd already worked a full shift before clocking in. You saw a violation of policy. I saw a choice between breaking a rule or breaking a promise. She paused, then looked up from the page. The room was still, listening. I never wanted recognition. I wanted to keep my father alive. I didn't ask for applause, but I won't apologize for loving someone more than the rules allowed me to. If this hospital or this industry punishes people like me, people who plug the holes left by broken systems, then we need to ask better questions. Not, why did she break the rules? But, why were there no rules that protected her in the first place? She lowered the paper slowly and placed it flat on the table. I'll accept whatever decision you make, she said calmly, but I won't be ashamed of what I did. For several seconds, no one moved. Then one of the board members, a tall, lean man with silver glasses, leaned forward, lacing his fingers thoughtfully. You broke zoning regulations, he said. You bypassed formal hospice care procedures. You didn't disclose your father's condition to hospital management. Emily braced herself. Then he added, but you also exposed a gaping hole in our support systems. And that's not a disciplinary issue. That's a wake-up call. He turned to the others. I recommend no further action. And I suggest we start funding an internal caregiving assistance program, starting with Nurse Tran's case. The others murmured in agreement. The director gave a firm nod. It's settled. Claire touched Emily's hand under the table, just once. It was done. 2 days later, Emily stood at her father's bedside one final time. The hospice room was filled with the kind of silence she had grown to recognize, the kind that meant the end was near, not with drama, but with quiet dignity. His breath was shallow now. The machines clicked rhythmically, but they didn't work to save him anymore. They were simply there to make the passage softer. Emily held his hand, thumb brushing over the paper-thin skin. I got to keep my job, she whispered. They didn't punish me. He didn't respond, but she swore his lips twitched. A faint smile, or maybe a memory. She continued, they're creating a program, one that helps nurses like me, for people like you, so maybe no one else has to hide in a basement again. Still no words, but she felt his fingers tighten. She stayed until the last breath left his lungs. Slow, quiet, almost like a sigh. She didn't cry right away. She just sat with him. And when the nurse came to confirm time of death, Emily rose, tucked the blanket up to his shoulders and whispered, thank you. Not because he was gone, but because he had stayed long enough for her to fight. In the weeks that followed, Emily returned to Gracewood, not as a headline, not as a hero, but as a nurse. A few patients recognized her. Some coworkers still watched her from across the hallway with complicated eyes, a mix of awe and discomfort. That was okay. She didn't need them to understand everything. Just enough. The new Caregiver Resource Program launched quietly in the following month, offering emergency support, temporary housing referrals, and off-the-record counseling for staff managing family illness. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. One afternoon, as Emily was finishing a late shift, she found a letter in her locker. No name on the envelope. Just her initials, handwritten in careful script. Inside was a note. Open quote, my sister's been caring for our mom in secret for 3 years. We never knew until I saw your story. I used to think she was just flaky. Now I realize she's the strongest person in the world. Thank you for helping me see that. You changed more than a hospital. You changed a family. Close quote. Emily folded the letter, pressed it to her chest, and let herself breathe. This time, the tears came. Quiet, cleansing. Not from pain, but from peace. Final scene epilogue. Sometimes Emily still thought about the elevator camera, the cold lens that captured her at her most fragile and unknowingly gave her the platform to speak. She had entered it every morning hoping to be invisible, and yet, in being seen, she found the strength to no longer hide.